Hi and welcome back to welcome back. Facilitate the rights and needs of clients. That's my name, that's my email address. You guys know all that. Previous weeks we've already covered the first learning outcome, so we're focusing today still on continuing what we had earlier, advocating in accordance with the client preferences and requests to optimize the client's outcomes. I don't want to tell you, continuing on the story of Mario. You remember Mario? Community services worker, that's the one. Yeah, well, it is a little bit cruel. But Mario, he stops and thinks, why does he advocate so much? And he asks himself, why should I do all this? Why don't they get off their asses and do it themselves? Mario's showing early signs of burnout, probably because of all that individual and group and systems advocacy that he's been doing from before the break. That's right, he worked very hard with all that research. Anyway, let's take a little bit closer as to why we're actually doing the advocacy. We'll book Mario in for some time out and a bit of a de-stress later. Maybe he can go to the WHS class, exactly. But in the meantime, it's a good, valid question. Why are we advocating for these people at all? Let's take a look at a couple of scenarios. We're working with a woman, she lives in supported accommodation. She doesn't feel she's had a chance to say her own views at a meeting about living with a partner, because when you've got control over someone's accommodation, either way, workers get tempted to do stuff they need to be woken up to occasionally. That's why we have charters of rights. Perhaps you're working with a group of disabled adults and they feel that the organisation isn't looking after the property adequately. Or maybe you hear about a worker having a personal relationship with a client and you're just not convinced that the client could say no to the relationship. There's a bit of a power imbalance there. You haven't got anything that you can make a clear report about, but you're still a bit uncomfortable. So here's three cases where a bit of advocacy would be appropriate. If you're in that advocacy role, thank you. If you're in the advocacy role, not there as an interpreter or as something else. Form into groups around your tables. What you've got there is just fine. What you're talking with, the same groups you had earlier. Some of the barriers that's stopping these people from doing that themselves. Basically, you're answering Mario's question, why don't these people get off their asses and do this themselves? What's stopping each of these people? I didn't give them names this time, but what's stopping them from expressing their concerns? Let's have a bit of a brainstorm, bit of a think about this one. Just the same groups as earlier. Just write the stuff down. Okay, so I'm going to be recording again. Okay, that was a good discussion. We've already discussed this in the classroom, but for the sake of the recording, here's what I had from the past student. So I basically, when you say this stuff, I copy it down afterwards. I put it in my little notepad. Here's what students have said in the past. I put these in a specific order. You'll see why in a moment. You had this one. So one of the barriers is they don't feel like they've actually got the power to do anything. They're kind of scared. There's that definite power imbalance you're talking about. Or maybe they just don't trust the worker. So, sorry? No, it's not color-coded to the scenarios. I just chose a pretty color for this part. So the stuff in blue is to do with all three. But you're right, the distrust of the worker because you're a colleague of the worker, so therefore there might be a bit of distrust there. That would make sense for the third, but there could also be, like you're working with a group of disabled adults. Let's look at the red one. They feel the organisation isn't looking after the property adequately. They might also still have a distrust of you, the worker, because you represent the organisation or you're in the industry. And the same with that first one. She lives in supported accommodation. It doesn't say whether you are working for that organisation, but you could still represent the system a little. They still might have a few reasons why they just plain don't trust you. And that's valid. That's good to acknowledge. Let's say we can see what the barriers are. And yeah, you guys mentioned this one earlier. They just plain don't expect anything different from the system. It's the way it's always been. It's what they're stuck with. It's what they got. Poor communication skills. I think people mentioned that one. Not knowing what their rights are. So not knowing that they've got the right to have the property looked after better, or to have her own views at the meeting stated, or whether she does have the right or not to live with a partner. You got it. And whether they got the opportunity to talk or to complain. Now, I said these are in order. Here's what I meant. I would summarise these. When I look at them, that looks like a fair summary of what we had in class. Different words, but nevertheless, that's a fair summary. I'd actually say these four are what I would call emotional barriers. Feeling powerless, feeling scared, distrust, not expecting any different. These ones I would say are more of a skills and a knowledge barrier. They don't have the skills, they haven't been educated on their rights, they haven't got the opportunity to talk or to complain, they don't have the communication skills. So looking at what you discussed earlier, I reckon we could say the same. Pretty much all of those are either what I guess I'd call an emotional barrier, or a skills or a knowledge, so internal stuff. So our response to each of those in the emotional barrier space is to give them the support, to help them with that emotional side, to encourage them, and to consider putting in an advocate. I think whether we're an advocate or not, that's a good question. Whether we're acting as an advocate in this scenario or not, I'd still say this is things that are overcoming the barriers for these people to getting their rights and needs met. In the skills and knowledge space, I'd say we're going to educate them, give them some information, help them practice. It's not enough to just tell people stuff. That's why I'm going to get you to do some role plays. It's not enough to just tell people stuff and inform them. They need to practice. They might need to do role plays. No, the clients might need to do role plays. In the workforce, you might actually help with your clients doing role plays. So actually acting out the part. So what did we have earlier? Maria, who wasn't getting paid properly, she can advocate for herself. You don't always need an advocate, but she could advocate for herself. But she's got this knowledge barrier and a skill barrier. So you could act the part of the boss and help her put her thoughts into words. That's a role play. Okay. Yeah, no, role plays aren't over when you graduate, when you leave the class. I'm sorry. Role plays are just something you'll keep on doing throughout your career. With that in mind, this is the process should advocacy be the way that we work. First of all, you're going to suss out, or to use the technical word, you're going to assess what the client's needs are. And in a logical progression, you're going to find out what their ability is to advocate for themselves. No, I didn't have self-advocacy as one of my list earlier, did I? I had individual, I had group, I had systems advocacy. Self-advocacy is they stick up for themselves. Add that to your notes, I'm happy with that. Third step, so find out what their needs are. See if they can do this themselves. Get their informed consent if you are going to advocate. Alternatively, after point 1 or 2, you might just go down that emotional support or skills support direction. If you're going to be advocating, get their informed consent to advocate so that you've got some license talk on their behalf. Gather all the information you need, both from the client and from, you might need to look up laws, you might need to look up policies. We talked, I don't know if you remember, but we talked back in previous lessons about charters of rights, bills of rights. So there's legal stuff, but there's also the agency's own charter of rights, of the client's rights. That's really good research to actually say, here's the principles you reckon you believe in. So what are you actually doing? So that's that sort of research, not just the legal, but also the agencies. Talk with the person involved. Clarify with the client if the person actually comes up with any offers to say, I'll do it this way. Clarify with the client if they're good with it. That should be easy if the client's standing beside you. Over the following weeks, talk about progress and outcomes and check that things are going the way that everybody agreed they would. That's the process. So let's look at this. Remember, Mario and Michelle. She's saying it's not a pay thing this time. My boss is such a jerk, I'm not even allowed to go to the toilet until the afternoon shift comes on. She's working in a shop. This was actually based on a story told to me by a previous student, and we advocated. That's not, no, that doesn't look anything like her. No, she doesn't wear flares. Yeah, you're right. Can you help me with this? Cool. What should I do first? Without looking at your notes. Okay, look at your notes. So the first thing we do is check out what their needs are. Cool. Her rights are being denied. We've got that ordered. Second thing, check out the client's ability to advocate for herself. Is there too strong an emotional or skills barrier or knowledge barrier to stopping her doing this herself? So let's think about some of the questions you could ask when we expand on that idea. Yeah, you could get, if there's a relationship because she's done all this advocacy before, or if there's not an relationship already, you could still be doing a fair bit of assessing, checking out, how's this all working? You could suss out her emotional skills. You could ask her. Yeah, so how would I find out? I would do a lot of asking and observing, perhaps practicing. And maybe there's some other people you could ask. So people who already know. Remember, advocacy is often, we're talking the disability sector or child work, childcare work. So we're talking other people might have info that would help you assess their ability to self-advocate. Because maybe she just needs some of that emotional support or the info or the training. If you're going to go ahead with it, get the client's informed consent. Okay, so informed consent in this case is not just, hey, do I have your permission? But informed consent is letting her know the consequences. It might cost her a job. It might give her a bad reputation. She might get embarrassed. All of that sort of stuff. Yeah, informed consent is a little different to just straight up, yes or no, can I do this? That's consent. This is informed consent. What are the possible things that could go wrong? Let's have a yarn about that. Again, talking about it, but not just getting her to sign a piece of paper. Clearly getting an understanding would be how Mario could be really sure that he had Michelle's permission. Keep going, Mario. Despite your burnout, you're doing all right here. Gather adequate information. He might do some, yeah, any ideas? Yep, the award. Or just some general industrial relations rights. There might be some policies already in the organisation. That's true. Sometimes there is already a policy in place for the parent organisation. So in this case, it was part of a larger chain. And they might have a policy that needs to change, or they might have a policy that says, yeah, we can organise a break. She can just shut the shop for 5 minutes, duck out, come back. So all that sort of information gathering. Check you've got your facts straight. Maybe she's not quite being accurate. Sometimes people will tell us that this is the way the boss treats me, but with a bit of info gathering, you discover it's not not quite as the client said it was. So do all that exploring that we talked about earlier. So this time, without checking your notes, that's the process. I think there's about 8 steps. Without checking your notes, here's a scenario. I'm going to get you to think through the steps and how you would act. Letitia has arranged to see you. You're a general case advocacy worker. That's her there. You're having a cup of coffee. She says, me and my 3-year-old Jill, we share a house with our friend Brad. He's living with us while he studies at TAFE. We share the cleaning, the cooking, the shopping. We go out together sometimes, but we're not in a relationship. We're just friends. Anyway, about a month ago, this field officer from Centrelink came to our place, asked lots of questions, like if I've actually cooked for Brad. I said, yeah. And the next thing I know is I get this letter from Centrelink cancelling my pension because they reckon I'm in a de facto relationship with Brad. As if that's right, they're sharing a house. Could you help me get this sorted? I haven't had any money since then, but I've got enough to get by on for now. So there'd be a bit of work there if there was a money issue. Okay, how did you all go? No, I know that hasn't been 5 minutes. I told you this is for the recordings, so it has a bit of flow to it. And this is people working from home by themselves. Let's give them 5 minutes to think about the answers. They might have needed to go to the toilet for themselves, for example, or get a cuppa. Just leave me alone. It's 5 minutes left. First things, how many people had? You're going to suss out what the client's needs are first. So in this case, that's right. I wanted you to think about the process. So thinking about, first step, her needs. You've got it. Her needs were some advocacy or some information perhaps. The needs that are being denied is that she's not being paid properly. It's sorted. Assess her ability to self-advocate. Does she seem capable of doing this? Does she feel like she's capable of doing this? Has she got the skills? We're sussing this out. She speaks quite well, I reckon. She presents quite well. She's perhaps, how literate is she? How good would she be if we just gave her the information? Are there emotional barriers? Does she just not know? What are the blockages stopping her going places? Is it emotional? Is it skills? What do we need to do there? Assuming that we still need to advocate, because maybe she's okay, but okay, assuming she's okay to self-advocate, help her to get the information together. So maybe we just go, this is part of how I would assess, is let's actually just jump to the next step. Let's jump to the info gathering stage. If there's nothing clear and obvious, no immediate alarm bells. And let's look at how we could assess, we could start gathering info and see how good she is with that. So if they're okay to self-advocate, help them gather the information, help them communicate, help them follow up the progress and see what's going to happen next. So if the client's not okay to advocate for themselves, keep them informed while you go through that same process. Gather the information, communicate, follow up the progress. So yeah, I've broken it down in lots of steps, but really it's reasonably straightforward so long as you do that bit of assessing their abilities and then you think it through and you keep them informed, or you be that support role as needed. And there's a bit of follow-up which we'll talk about in a future week. Okay, I reckon we've pretty much covered a fair bit of that second outcome. Point 3, provide ongoing support. It's not rocket science, but we'll look at that in a future week.